Hello, my name's David Rawnsley. This is the fourth of 5 videos that share the mystical thoughts of some of our greatest scientists. As Nobel Prize recipients, they must also be recognized as the greatest scientists that mainstream science can muster. Max Planck, who, in a creative quantum leap of his own, suggested that nature is not continuous but comes in packets of energy, what he termed quanta. He is known as the father of modern quantum theory and got his Nobel Prize in 1918 when he was 60 years old. He too was a mystic, and the following essay on the mystery of our being is taken from his book, Where is Science Going?, published when he was 74 years old. Planck looks at the subject of miracles and metaphysics. He begins, "We might naturally assume that one of the achievements of science would have been to restrict belief in miracle. But it does not seem to be so. The tendency to believe in the power of mysterious agencies is an outstanding characteristic of our own day. This is shown in the popularity of occultism and spiritualism and their innumerable variants. Though the extraordinary results of science are so obvious that they cannot escape the notice of even the most unobservant man in the street, yet educated as well as uneducated people often turn to the dim region of mystery for light on the ordinary problems of life. One would imagine that they would turn to science, and it is probably true that those who do so are more intensely interested in science and are perhaps greater in number than any corresponding group of people in former times. Still, the fact remains that the drawing power of systems which are based on the irrational is at least as strong and as widespread as ever before, if not more so. How is this peculiar fact to be explained? Is there, in the last analysis, some basically sound foothold for this belief in miracle? No matter how bizarre and illogical may be the outer forms it takes? Is there something in the nature of man, some inner realm that science cannot touch? Is it so that when we approach the inner springs of human action, science cannot have the last word? Or, to speak more concretely, is there a point at which the causal line of thought ceases and beyond which science cannot go? This brings us to the kernel of the problem in regard to free will. And I think that the answer will be found automatically suggested by the questions which I have just asked. The fact is, there is a point, one single point in the immeasurable world of mind and matter, where science, and therefore every causal method of research, is inapplicable, not only on practical grounds, but also logical grounds, and will always remain inapplicable. This point is the individual ego. It is a small point in the universal realm of being, but in itself it is the whole world, embracing our emotional life, our will, and our thoughts. The realm of ego is at once the source of our deepest suffering and at the same time of our highest happiness. Over this realm, no outer power of fate can ever have sway, and we lay aside our own control and responsibility over ourselves only with the laying aside of life itself. Now, when Planck speaks of the ego, it should be remembered that in German philosophical traditions, the ego is synonymous with our understanding of the I and the sense of I-ness. He goes on, here is the place where freedom of the will comes in and establishes itself, without usurping the right of any rival. Being emancipated thus, we are at liberty to construct any miraculous background that we like in the mysterious realm of our own inner being, even though we may be at the same time the strictest scientists in the world and the strictest upholders of the principle of causal determinism. It is from this autarky of the ego that the belief in miracles arises, and it is to this source that we are to attribute the widespread belief in irrational explanations of life. The existence of that belief in the face of scientific advance is a proof of the inviolability of the ego by the law of causation in the sense which I have mentioned. I might put the matter in another way and say that the freedom of the ego here and now and its independence of the causal chain is the truth that comes from the immediate dictate of the human consciousness. Science thus brings us to the threshold of the ego and there leaves us to ourselves. Here it resigns us to the care of other hands. In the conduct of our own lives, the causal principle is of little help, for by the iron law of logical consistency, we are excluded from laying the causal foundations of our own future or foreseeing that future as definitely resulting from the present. But mankind has need of fundamental postulates for the conduct of everyday existence. And this need is far more pressing than the hunger for scientific knowledge. A single deed often has far more significance for a human being than all the wisdom of the world put together. And therefore, there must be another source of guidance than mere intellectual equipment. The law of causation is the guiding rule of science, but the categorical imperative, that is to say, the dictate of duty, is the guiding rule of life. Here, intelligence has to give place to character and scientific knowledge to religious belief. And when I say religious belief here, I mean the word in its fundamental sense. There can never be any real opposition between religion and science. Every serious and reflective person realizes, I think, that the religious element in his nature must be recognized and cultivated if all the powers of the human soul are to act together in perfect balance and harmony. And indeed, it was not by any accident that the greatest thinkers of all ages were also deeply religious souls, even though they made no public show of their religious feeling. It is from the cooperation of the understanding with the will that the finest fruit of philosophy has arisen, namely the ethical fruit. Science enhances the moral values of life because it furthers a love of truth and reverence. Love of truth displaying itself in the constant endeavour to arrive at a more exact knowledge of the world of mind and matter around us. And reverence because every advance in knowledge brings us face to face with the mystery of our own being. Thank you, Mr. Planck.